or will catalyze faster action. We will use this time of crisis to push forward short-term measures or take longer-term steps. We need the knowledge created together by the science and practice to speed up the green transition. While many of the actions of countries are still lagging behind, and 1.5 degree development is already emerging city by city. We are implementing an ambitious climate plan. The main goal is to become a carbon neutral area by 2029 and climate positive thereafter. And we have already decreased our Scope 2 emissions by 55% from the level of 90s. So we have transformed our energy system from fossils to renewables. We are promoting sustainable mobility and urban development. We are increasing our carbon sinks in forests and greeneries and do many other climate actions as well. And these actions make life in Turku better and happier in many ways for every resident. One of the key reasons why we can reach our goals is the use of best available knowledge. We utilize scientific knowledge and create solutions together with partners and civic society. And it's very helpful that we are doing this work together within networks such as Global Covenant of Mayors, ICLEI, and many city networks involving also science partners and businesses, so we can actually better understand, better learn, better share, and improve together. Next Wednesday, the action agenda will be launched at the LGMA Multi-Level Action Pavilion, convened by ICLEI, and the day after we will support in carrying these messages to the first ever UNFCCC Ministerial on Urbanization and Climate Research as a holistic and inclusive initiative will also be launched. But more importantly, ICLEI will also connect to IPCC Urban Report to the global stocktake process that will evolve next year. And this will be a true example through science and multi-level action. ICLEI and all LGMA partners will continue to drive the global action into emergency mode. So, dear friends, cities are the key to fast climate transition. When we bring science, cities, businesses, and residents together, there is now no better way to speed up climate solutions. And I'm very happy for the summary for urban policymakers. So let us work together to ensure that scientific knowledge is taken to use by the cities for the benefit of both the local communities and the whole planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. It was fabulous to hear kind of what you're doing, how you're doing it, why you're doing it, and providing really a solution space to what we just heard outlined, so desperately needed by the science. Thank you so much for that. Now I'd like to turn to you, Manuel, and love to hear similar questions to you, but from your perspective in Quelimane and from Mozambique. Love to hear the same sets of issues and actions and opportunities as you see them based on the usability of science, the accessibility of it, and what you're using and what you could use more of to drive that forward. Over to you, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's really a great opportunity and a great privilege and honor for me to be with these distinguished scientists sharing some thoughts about their work, but more important, about the importance of their work for mayors like me. I would like to start by making a confession. Most things in my life happen by accident. And therefore, I became a mayor by accident. I was living in London, was working for Amnesty International, and I met a friend who had some money and wanted to make some social business investment ventures in the global south. Well, I said, okay, why don't we start from my city, Quelimane? So we went to Quelimane, and while we were there, the former mayor, he was sacked on corruption charges But the law then required that new elections should be run. And suddenly, people were coming to me and inviting me to run for a mayor. Of course, I said no. I have got other plans. And then my dad called me and said, my son, why did we send you to school then if you are not available when your city needs you? So I couldn't say no. I had to accept it. And since then, I've been there since 2011. Imagine for somebody who was out of his city for more than 20 years, is back, suddenly is elected a mayor. I didn't know what to do. And the problems were booming. My city was the center of economic growth 20 years before. But due to the civil war in Mozambique, the economy was completely depleted and the city was in decline. So the problems were there. I didn't have really planned because I didn't have time to think about what I was going to do. But I was elected. So I needed a boussole. I needed someone to tell me and help me to manage my city. What did I do? I made a compact with the few university lecturers and students, and we started palming out the problems of the city. That's, in summary, what I see is the role of science for mayors. You provide us a boussole identifying the problems, the strategies, and how to solve them. Imagine a pilot on a high sea during a cyclone without a boussole. He will not know where to go or which direction to take. This is the important role of science. As the member of ICLEI's Regional Executive Committee for Africa, which is actually the fastest urbanizing continent, but also the continent with the highest percentage of young people, I'm particularly excited and actually very proud to join this meeting and endorse the outcomes of this study. I'm informed that actually it was in Nairobi, in Africa, where cities agenda was first discussed at the IPCC. And now, coincidentally, it is in Sharm el-Sheikh, another African city, where cities and we all are making this major step, this major push forward. You can imagine how proud and how happy I am for this coincidence, I will say. This shows, again, the importance of Africa, the importance of leadership, once again. Worldwide action is more urgent than previously assessed. I think we all agree, and we heard today from these eminent scientists. Floods, extreme heat waves, typhoons are facing people from across the world, leading to loss, poverty, and destruction. My own city this year suffered from the effects of Cyclone Gombe. 3 years ago, my country suffered not one, not two, but 3 cyclones. Cyclone Idai, Cyclone Kenneth, which actually Cyclone Idai destroyed the second biggest city in Mozambique, the city of Beira, according to UN data, on 9% of its infrastructure. You can imagine the impact of that. Therefore, action has never been as urgent, and cities are critical to accelerate the implementation of solutions that can respond to these pressing challenges. Science plays an important role in supporting local action by pinpointing the risks faced with a changing climate scenario, as well as the potential solutions and development pathways that cities can leverage towards a climate-resilient development. The opportunity for effective, efficient, and rapid action in cities depends on accessible, actionable science at the city scale. In order to roll out sustainable response, cities need robust science, local and timely information and data at the city scale to build and to be able of coming up with an integrated adaptation and mitigation planning. This information should be made available for end users such as urban planners, both, and also to all decision makers such as mayors, the business, and the general public, so that this can be put to use to strengthen urban adaptation preparedness as well as to leverage the numerous core benefits of integrated climate action. For example, mitigation, air quality, NBS, and its islands, as well as consider carefully risk of maladaptation and lock-ins. The summary for Urban Policymakers initiative responds to those needs. It has been bringing together the world's leading scientists with local policymakers and businesses to co-generate and advance a scientific evidence base to propel implementation and deepen climate action in cities around the world. I and my other colleagues have been involved and have been consulted in this process. As it was mentioned here, in Kisumu, we met, we discussed the preliminary findings of this report, and we made some recommendations. And I'm happy today to testimony that some of those recommendations that we local leaders made are indeed incorporated in this report. So we jointly assume and also we feel as co-owners of this report. That's what transparency is all about. That's what inclusiveness is all about. We, as those who are on the ground in the first line of climate change, we need space to put our concerns and also to be able of contributing to the possible solutions. Many cities face challenges in finding and retaining expert practitioners, in acquiring technical knowledge, in accessing funding, but also in making a scientifically based case for local investment, particularly for adaptation and resiliency. This COP, called the African COP, has been also called the Implementation COP. But more importantly, we hope it will be the funding COP, but the funding for subnational entities, because we are in the first line of climate change. We suffer the consequences in first hand. Just to give again the example of Beira City. When Cyclone Idai hit the city of Beira, for 4 full days, Beira could not receive support by road, by sea, by air, or by railway, because the conditions were not there. Bridges were destroyed. Nobody could fly in because of the weather. Nobody could come with ships because of the weather. So it was the mayor of Beira City and his staff who for 4 full days has to keep the city afloat. Even the resources that they had kept in the banks, they could not access. There was no electricity and the infrastructure was destroyed. They could not access the few resources they had kept aside, but they had to, with their own imagination, to keep the city afloat and to organize the defense and the survival of Beira City. I'm using the experience of Beira. I could use my own experience during Cyclone Gombe, where also I had, for 3 days, not gone home, but with my staff, be in the villages, helping my citizens to cope with the first-hand impact of global and climate change. I want also to point out that access to data and scientific evidence at city scale remains a very big issue, specifically for the cities and local government in the global south. Cities need robust science at the city scale to build integrated adaptation and mitigation planning. But as it was said here, and I pointed out, data is very often lacking. And somebody who goes for a fight without data is more likely to lose. Most of the times, I point out to mayors, I compare mayors as firefighters. If a firefighter goes to combat a fire somewhere without knowing the type, the intensity, and which, so he will not be able of devising the right strategy to fight that fire. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I want to reiterate that we need scientific support and evidence as localized as possible. This is crucial to ensure that the plans and actions have a solid ground for a successful implementation. There is a need for an approach that brings from the bottom up, where local governments and other subnational institutions are involved in this process of policy making. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I love your passion and the examples that you gave and how profound these impacts already are. We are running short on time because of some of the issues we had in the beginning, but I am very excited to turn to our next panelist, and I hope you'll stay a little longer to hear from Joe. Joe, as the Global Director of Sustainability for Arup, you're often in a position to influence the urban design of cities today and in the future. I'm very curious how Arup specifically, but broader the business community which you're representing today through the engagement on this project, might work better with scientists and mayors around the world when the best global climate science is made available at the scale of a city. Over to you, Joe.
Good evening, and I wanted to begin by saying a very deep felt and sincere thank you to everyone involved in this process. You've made my job much, much easier in an instant. At COP21, I celebrated afterwards because of the Paris Agreement, but I celebrated for a second reason, because there was recognition that cities were a critical part of the solution. And I believe that very, very deeply, because I believe that people are a critical part of the solution, and the majority of the world's population live in cities. And I also think the way that we've gone about designing the infrastructure and urban environments in the past is responsible for a lot of the problems that we're in. So we have to make this very significant shift. I came away from COP26 also happy, because for the first time I really felt that adaptation and resilience was on the agenda. But I also felt that business was on the agenda, that businesses were seen as part of the solution, because businesses will, for them to survive, they need to adapt, and they need to align what they do with the key issues. But the problem, and it has been such a big problem, is that businesses haven't really understood the detail of what the problem is and what it means to them. My late mother used to say to me as a child, Joe, understanding the problem is halfway to the solution. And with these reports, you've helped all businesses and all cities understand the problem. And you've made it tangible, relevant, and practical. And those three things are the things that I think we need to focus on. So before today, there was 3,900 pages of Volume 1. 228 of those pages relate to cities and infrastructure, which is what my business does. And that's a lot to wade through and digest and be confident that that science I'm translating into stuff that people can use. Now there is 23 pages and a beautifully clear presentation. But what's really important is the process that you've gone through to get to where we are. It's relevant because it's been developed with cities, with businesses, for cities and for businesses. So the information's presented in a way that just makes sense, and I can take off the shelf and use it. And that's because it's practical. The fact that it gets down to really a common language that everyone can use. We can talk about the 5 systems changes within cities. We can start categorizing cities in terms of those 3 types of categories. And that enables the deep collaboration across the value chain between business and government, between society, business and government, that is absolutely fundamental to create the changes that we need. I think that this is a milestone, I really do. I think it's going to be a big wake-up call for everyone who reads these reports, who's actually been seeing the enormity of the situation we face through a fog of scientific language of 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees. And now it's in language that my late mum would understand. And it's one truth created by all the scientists in the world, distilled by those scientists working with businesses, with cities, to make it accessible. And we do all have to understand the scale and the urgency of the challenge and be provided with this knowledge to allow us to be part of the solution. Debra said earlier that there's not a single city or village or community in the world that can afford not to be part of the solution. Everyone has a role to play, but we just actually need to all be pulling in the same direction. I'd like to say the other thing that I really enormously welcome from this report is the fact that there's now one agenda. And businesses are overwhelmed by the fact that one day they're asked to think about the Sustainable Development Goals, the next day it's about mitigation, the next day it's about adaptation. And for years I've advocated that there is one solution. We have to bring it all together. We can't afford to do things in bits. We have to look at things holistically. I also really welcome the fact that you've brought the simplicity of the 3 ingredients that need to come together to make things possible, and that is people, place, and planet. Climate change isn't an abstract intellectual problem. It's about how we choose to design the places and spaces that we live in. And the people who live in them are part of the solution. We have an energy crisis at the moment. The infrastructure providers can think about how they address that energy crisis. The policy people can think about how they react to the energy crisis. But people can make choices. They can turn down the temperature in their house. They can put on an extra jumper. And we need to make people part of that solution. Finally, I'd just like to say that the last bit that is really so important is we ask ourselves the whole time, what do we need to focus on? And then what role can we play? Those are the 2 things that people have woken up to the scale of the challenge is what can we actually do? We all need agency. Every business in the world needs some agency in this. And with the action agenda in these reports, you get down to the beginnings of understanding the barriers that need to be overcome to enable us to do so much more. It's music to my ears when I read statements saying the problem is that there's gaps in data at the city scale. Yes, there is. Because you've written that down, we can now move on to, okay, how do we address that problem? How do we overcome that barrier? These reports flag the importance of nature, that green and blue infrastructure is a critical part of cities. That's one of the most rapidly growing agendas. My organization has just done a nature-based drainage master plan for the city of Beijing. We've used satellite data, we've used machine learning to analyze a city as big as Beijing and harness the power of nature to create the solutions we need to flooding in the future, and then adding grey infrastructure on top of that. We need nature-based solutions to be there. And then things like government and business collaboration. This is one of the first COPs that businesses have been really welcome at. Businesses can't apply to come to COPs unless it's through other organizations. Or if they're very, very rich businesses, which mine is not, and they sponsor pavilions. We chose not to sponsor a pavilion. We chose to bring 8 people from the global south to COP who wouldn't have otherwise been able to be here. And I really stress that, that's just an example of a business like mine wanting to do more, wanting to be creative, and wanting to know how we can help be part of the solution. So I congratulate you all. A big thank you to all the people who have put so much voluntary time into this. My job going out of this is to spread the word amongst the business community, and I hope that maybe not at the next COP, but perhaps one in 5 years' time, instead of looking at a panel where there are 5 scientists and 2 cities and 1 person representing business, we've got a panel where there's the scientists who play such a critical role going forwards, keeping the score, telling us, are we going in the right direction? Are we doing good? And providing the data that we so badly need to keep us on track. But then I'd like to see 5 cities and several business represented. And we move, as of today, into the solution space together. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you so much for that. And now I'd like to turn it over to Thelma Krug to kind of wrap up this session. Thelma holds a special place in my heart. She was one of the first people who took me under her wing as I was a new IPCC author on the special report on 1.5 degrees back in 2016. But aside from that personal special place for me, she before this served as a co-chair for the IPCC Task Force on National Greenhouse Gas Inventories from 2002 until 2015. And for more than 15 years, she represented Brazil in the negotiations at the UNFCCC with a particular focus on issues related to land use change in forestry, research and systemic observations, and reporting guidelines. So Thelma, over to you to kind of share some reflections on what we've heard tonight.
Okay, thank you very much, Seth. I think I remember you said I have half an hour. I'm joking. How to wrap up this session. When you started, Seth, you said something, that this summary for urban policymakers was the result of passion, coordination, commitment, engagement. You said many of these. And I think that if you would have been able to pass a piece of paper to each one of the authors and ask them, what really triggered you to do this? I thought you wanted to have a sabbatical from the IPCC, after, having the reports approved and everything, which was, quite a challenge, I would say. So most likely they would say it's passion, because passion is what moves most of the authors to do what they do. If you give me a piece of paper to say, Thelma, what is your feeling when you see the summer for policymakers that Aromar was showing me yesterday? And I would say, well, this is the result of hope. This is the result of hope. And why do I say that? I say that, there is nothing that pushes the authors back to say, we really have the hope that our message will get, and I like to say, to the hearts of policymakers. And this is not for policymakers, this is for all for everybody. So the selection of these messages that we saw from Working Group 1, Working Group 2, Working Group 3, that I'm absolutely convinced that it's much more difficult to do a summary than to do the big report, because you have to select. And when you are putting the 3 working groups together, that is even a greater challenge, because you have to fight for space, you have to fight for the messages, and this is not really a simple thing to do, right? So I think that the hope that this summary will trigger the transformation, I like to say transformation, I like to say system transitions, but I like to say transformation that is needed to have the actions started, because we have the science-based solutions. And there is something, Jim, that from the report from mitigation that says, well, we have today options that can halve the emissions by 2030 relative to 2019. That is a very strong message to me. Does it come simple? Absolutely not. because you have many barriers that you have to overcome for that. So you have institutional barriers, you have social barriers, you have environmental barriers, you name it. But the options are there. Cities are, to me, the best place to really start this transformation that we need. In all 5 system transitions that were mentioned by Debra, were mentioned by Jim. Because if we consider production, cities have basically, 90% of the greenhouse gas emissions, because you're talking about transportation, you're talking about infrastructure, you're talking about everything. One thing that really caught my attention when one of the pictures were shown, and I think it was you, Jim, that showed that city. I was looking for a tree. And that is really scary, because you just see, the buildings, the concrete. You just see that people have given up. They prioritized the wrong things. So I'm really thinking that to stop now, Seth, and saying that, when we started this cycle that ends next year, mid-next year, we started with 2 things that I remember very clearly. The first one, I was the champion for the special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius. And that report was the first initiative to bring the 3 working groups together. So it was a really integrated work. It was really at the beginning of a cycle, bringing, them as a unity. The second element that caught my attention was the meeting that we had for the communication strategy of the IPCC. Because it was always said that the IPCC does a lot, but it doesn't communicate. So this cycle, in my vision, was one of the best in terms of trying to do better in terms of communication. Science is very difficult to communicate. It's complex, it's difficult. People always think, oh no, those are scientists, I don't want to, But when you have summary that brings a simple language that is accessible to everybody can assimilate that and start the transformation that we all are looking for. So that is how I see the summary. For this summary, I'm not going to talk about the messages, which are great, but honestly, I see it as a hope for the transformation we need, and I am absolutely sure that it's a seed. It's a seed that is being planted to really have that promotion of the paradigm shift that we need to have in cities, be it in transportation, be it in the way the cities are planned, be in the way we construct the cities, the way we need to bring trees. We need to do more and make cities a nice place to live. So thank you very much, and I thank the co-chairs. Dear co-chairs, I thought you had given up after the approval sessions that have been so difficult. Honestly, it is good that somebody doesn't have to go through that process. So I'm very happy that you still have the stamina, the courage, and the hope that I'm absolutely sure that everyone here has. So thank you very much, and see you soon.
Thank you, Thelma. Thank you. Just to wrap this up, I'd like to thank all the IPCC authors, co-chairs for their continued leadership, passion, and support, the Global Covenant of Mayors and all its member networks, and all the individual city officials who contributed their time and knowledge. To Resilience First, their member companies and the individuals who engaged in this process. Resilience Rising, the core team who helped shepherd this along. The Indian Institute for Human Settlements and their dedicated work and coordination of the lead authors in designing these beautiful reports. Arup, who provided project management support. The German Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action and GIZ for their vision and financial support. And last but not least, Amanda Eichel, who oversaw the entirety of the program, and Ian Klaus, who served as a series editor to ensure that hundreds of different contributors came across as one voice. Thank you all. And if lastly, there's a tremendous number of people in this room who helped. If you could please stand and take one round of applause. If you were involved in this report in any way, please stand. Thank you very much, and hopefully this eases you all into your weekend. Thank you for staying.